This past Sunday, we looked at a passage from Matthew, and we looked into how our words matter. We read through how out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So our words are a reflection of our inner condition. And as we walked through that, we identified that can give us a little bit of a gut punch in our reflectiveness to where are we at? Because not always do good things come out of our mouths. We are all human and we just live in the sinful world. And then we talked also how we can move into a life of restoration because Jesus came to take that which was broken and sinful and make it whole. And so as we walk through that, we're just reminded of different places in the Bible, like how our words matter and then how we bear fruit. So what is good in us comes out as good fruit, and what is not so good comes out as bad fruit. And just being aware of that inner condition and how do we walk through that. And then what does that look like in today's world? Because we don't talk a lot about just looking like fruit.
Yeah.
This is somewhat odd. But we are known as Christians by the fruit of the Spirit. So what does that look like? And it should look more like the goodness of God, right? The love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control that we see in Galatians. So how do we take that and live that testimony of a transformed life in such a broken world? So we were leaving you with a couple questions after that, just to kind of set up to, as we live in the tension of things not being right, but yet we have to show up in the world that we live, and we are influencers in all the different areas, whether it's in your vocation or your community or in your team or in your classroom at school. I mean, we are all influencers and we have all been influenced by other people. So how are we carrying this fruit of the Spirit, and how are we living a transformed life, even as we are in process? Because we haven't fully been in the presence of Jesus to be in our fullness yet, but we are in this tension moment, and what does that look like? So there was one statement that came out on Sunday morning that was like, there are many ways to destroy our lives, but there's only one way to restore it, and that's through a relationship with Jesus. So as we get ready to restore things and look at things that need restored around us, there are two questions that I wanted to leave with you today. So I'm going to start with the first one, and that is, what do you see in the world around you that is in need of restoration?
So I love this question because it kind of assumes that we're in a place where we can see around. And we can see the things that need restored. And the truth is that when we talk about that fruit, I mean, we love good fruit. I don't care, like maybe a mango's your thing, or maybe it's a strawberry, but the idea of fresh fruit, even to our palates, sounds so good. And so sometimes what we do as a faith community, and hopefully not Shawnee Alliance, but the church evangelical, is that we say, this is amazing, so let's hunker down and just enjoy it together. But actually the call on our lives is to go and to take that fruit to people who are desperately hungry. And so I love this first question, because essentially, are we seeing things around us that need restored? Are we seeing brokenness? And when we do we just say, well, I hope that just fades out of existence? Or are we saying we're actually called to be part of making it better? I love this question because I don't know exactly what you see, but I don't have to look around long before I see, oh, there's some places where the Holy Spirit's presence, where just us being gospel in our communities could really make a difference. But this is a real question, and you'll notice that the format you're viewing it in, we have this question for you to respond to us, because we really want to know what you're saying. We really want to incorporate this into how we're teaching and how we're walking this out. So I encourage you to actually take time to think, to pray, to process through this, and to ask that question, what around me is in need of restoration?
Yes. And just to remember too, look, when you're thinking about that, not just what do I need to do, but like what is missing here? Like what could God make better, and how do I do that? So, and then the second question is, how has God placed you into the places that you influence to bring about restoration?
So one of my favorite parts about Sarah's sermon was when she talked about you do not need what we think of as a traditional platform. These are Chris' words, not yours, but they can review the tape. You do not need to be on a stage, and you do not need to have thousands and thousands of followers to be able to influence. So what I love about this is I know that for some, we are called to be spread wide. And what I mean by that is that there's going to be a lot of influence. I think of some of my favorite preachers like Francis Chan, and I really love listening to a great Francis Chan sermon or a Bible study. But the reality is that he's not going to get to know Chris Browning. And, you know, my buddy Francis is a good guy, but if I'm really honest, I don't know him that well, you know. We don't play, you know, golf together or something like that. But he is called to have this tremendously wide ministry, but he's also called to go deep in certain areas with certain people. And so the truth is that for many of us, we don't have a platform, we don't have a social media presence, and that's fine. Where is God calling you to dive deep? And I think of like a coach, and if you're a coach of a baseball team, you've got 12, 13, 14 players, and you coach 25 years, right? You can do the math, because I don't feel like it right now, but you influence all those lives. But the truth is that, yeah, one sermon from some world-renowned preacher is going to be heard by more people, but I guarantee that no sermon ever preached, other than maybe the Sermon on the Mount, had as deep of an influence as 4 years of influence in a young person's life. So I want to encourage you, what does that look like? And where are you planted? Sometimes we look around, we say, we have to move to go influence people for Jesus. We have to change something. And maybe God's calling you to change something. If he is, do it. That's amazing. But let's start with, where am I planted and how am I called to grow gospel here? And if we can answer that question, the truth is if God calls us elsewhere, fine, we'll go, we'll be fruitful there, but we're called to be fruitful wherever we are. Think about the New Testament. Think about how many letters Paul wrote. And think about where he was for so many of them, in prison, in chains. The Apostle John, writing letters from exile on Patmos. These were men who were isolated from their faith community, and yet they still made a difference because they chose to go deep in their love of gospel, their love of Christ. So what are these two questions again?
First one is, what do you see in the world around you that is in need of restoration? And the second one is, how has God placed you in those places that you influence to bring about his restoration?
We're both excited. We really want to know these answers. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking, it doesn't have to make sense to you. These answers, think about it, God is at work. And how many times has he been at work where at the end of the process, you're like, oh, well, thanks, Jesus. That's not how I saw it, but here we are. So just don't make it fit into a framework that you think makes sense. This is different. It's what is God doing here in and through you.
So thank you for that consistent call, Sarah, because I think it's a reminder that it's not just seeing what we can do in our own power. It's looking toward God and saying, if Jesus was physically present right here, what would be the outcome, and how do I get to partner with gospel to be able to bring about some of that outcome? It'll never be perfect this side of heaven, right? Until Jesus is fully enthroned, it's never going to be perfect. But let's do for some what we wish we could do for all. And let's be able to engage as a church. How is God calling us to go from this place to bring about a little bit of change or a little bit of restoration in the places he's already planted us? And then we can talk all we want about going together intentionally into difficult and dark places. Let's start where we already are. A pretty good place to leave it for now.
Sounds good to me.
Sarah, thank you for a tremendous sermon, as always, and I cannot wait to continue this series with you. I am sorry your not favorite preacher is preaching this upcoming Sunday, but we'll make it through together.